Ms Patten.
Thank you, President. And I would like to briefly speak to the Transport Legislation Amendment, Better Roads Victoria and Other Amendments Bill. And well, I note that this bill implements a Better Roads Victoria Trust Fund, which will hypothecate the traffic camera fines to suburban, rural and interface roads, and I think this is very sensible. And sadly, I have contributed to that fund in the past, and no doubt I may contribute to this fund in the future. Yes, I'm doing my bit to help with the funding of roads in Victoria. The bill also shifts the responsibility for the management of interlocks from the courts to Vic Road, and I think this is really sensible, and we know that our courts are just so clogged and just sinking under the weight of business that is now being conducted through our courts. So I think these are both sensible amendments, and it's largely a sensible bill. But looking at interlocks and looking at the notion of drink driving, I couldn't help but turn my mind to drug driving and driving under the influence of drugs and the effect, and sometimes the very damaging effect that has. And we know that drugs and alcohol together have an exponential effect on people's ability to drive safely. So while looking through this bill, I did think it was an opportunity to introduce what I would think were very reasonable and sensible amendments to the Road Safety Act to allow people who have been prescribed medicinal cannabis to drive. Now, I'm not saying to allow people who are impaired to drive. I am suggesting that people who have been prescribed a medicine to be allowed to drive. And this is exactly the same as we treat all other prescription medicines. This is the only medicine that is not treated in this way. So I use an example of a patient that I know who had the choice of a benzodiazepine prescription to help her sleep, or using a high CBD oil to help her sleep. Now, the CBD oil had a moderate level of THC in it, but it didn't impair her when she woke up in the morning. Quite the opposite. She felt bright, she felt great, but she couldn't take the kids to school. Now, if she'd taken the benzodiazepine, she would have been able to take the kids to school, and she might have felt a bit groggy. But under the current legislation, you cannot, if you are prescribed medicinal cannabis, even if it is with the smallest amount of THC, which is what is picked up, you cannot drive. So my amendments look to excluding medicinal cannabis prescribed by a doctor from the offence of driving with drug present in oral fluid. Now, this only applies to methamphetamines, ecstasy and cannabis. So if a person has been prescribed the cannabis, they should be exempt from this. As I say, of course, this does not affect the cases of when someone has been, when someone is driving recklessly or someone is driving impaired by a substance. So my amendments are small. The first amendment just changes some of the clause 1, some of the lines in there. Clause 2, Clause 6 are complementary to that. I add some definitions to the Road Safety Act. So we add medicinal cannabis product into the Act, and that'll have exactly the same meaning as the Access to Medicinal Cannabis Act 2016. I add patient medicinal cannabis access authorisation, and that again has exactly the same meaning as the Access to Medicinal Cannabis Act 2016 that was unanimously supported by this chamber last term. And we also changed the definition of prescription drug to enable medicinal cannabis to be recognised under the Road Safety Act as what it is, a prescription drug. So I think this is very sensible. It's something that was probably, in my mind, was a bit of an oversight at the time of debating the medicinal cannabis Medicinal Cannabis Act, and I appreciate that the minister who had carriage of that act now has carriage of this act for this debate. So I know that she is well abreast of this issue. Just finally, I'd also take note that the Law Reform, Road and Community Safety Committee, which actually looked at this issue and did a whole chapter on drug driving and on the effects of it, in one of our recommendations, which was largely bipartisan, I have to say, that we anticipated that there would be changes to drug driving laws resulting from the availability of medicinal cannabis. Now, this is not just affecting one person, this is affecting hundreds and thousands of current patients, but also prospective patients, that if a mother can't take medicinal cannabis to assist with anxiety or to assist to sleep or to assist with nausea due to cancer treatment, she can't take it because she can't drive her kids to school the next day. Many patients are choosing much more harmful prescription medication so they can continue to drive. So I would commend my amendments, but I also support this bill. But I'll look forward to answering any questions about my amendments in the committee.